is African Culture Market Black History Month special, where we have the 3 heavyweight kings. It's an annual event. It's a very special one. It is an honor that Stella B and myself that I get to host basically our heroes. And I say this, I want to say this real quick, basically. They are like a constant thing that happens, and a conversation in our community is what is happening to our young people. Our young people are doing X, Y, Z. The issue is role models. We have a lot of role models. It's just that they're not seen. Us here are privileged to be amongst greats. It is an honor. And one of the things that I feel that we could do is just be a bit more loud in terms of the role models that we have in our community. I mean, those of us that work tirelessly every day of our lives to make a difference. There's a reason, like, one of our heavyweight kings, Tony Warner, made a point about how comes he can come across all sorts of things with minimal resources, and then BBC, with all of its resources, lose stuff like McCoy's. How do they do that? This is tactical. This is a decision that they're making, deliberate. So, I just want us, even though the seats should be, every seat should be filled, but at least I can see ancestors are filled with filling them up. That's okay. But what we can do is actually just be a bit more vocal with our heroes. Now I'd like to say that me growing up, I had the blessing, my parents showed me Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and such, and Marcus Garvey and such and such. So that shaped me. But as I've got older, the ones that have kind of passed, so most of the people that I look up to are the people that are around me, or people that I go to the presentation I'm inspired by. And the final heavyweight king is one of our great inspirations.
Absolutely.
And his knowledge is so expansive. It's just jewels everywhere. So with all that said, can we show a strong African hand for the last heavyweight king of the night, the Black History man,
Robin Walker!
Okay, I hope people enjoyed the session. Alright, so why are we here? Who's here for some powerful Black history information? Who's here to support RTG in making big things happen for the Black community? Who's here because, quite frankly, it's Sunday and you've got no better place to go? Alright, so I have to respect the fact that your education is in my hands for the next hour. So I'm not going to be wasting your time. I'm going to make sure that you get value for the time and hope people enjoy what we're going to do. Alright, so I also have to big up Auntie Jean. I also have to big up the posse that put this event together. This is actually one of my favourite events of the year, so I'm pleased to be here, so here it is. And the big question for you, of course, is, well, what's in it for you? You're going to learn empowering information on African history, detailed content on African history and its link to gold-based wealth, and history that closes the gap between ancient Egypt and slavery. You see, when Afrocentrists deal with Black history, it's usually ancient Egypt or it's slavery, and it's almost as if there's no history and no heritage in between. This session is going to close that gap. Now, why do we deal with African history? Why is it important? You see, everybody in this room has to look at everybody else in this room as a potential collaborator, a potential team player. You have to be able to see potential in the person sitting next to you. And that can only happen if you can see value in the person sitting next to you. And that value comes from history. Mental slavery is the worst form of slavery. It gives you the illusion of freedom, makes you trust, love, and defend your oppressor, while making an enemy of those who are trying to free you and open your eyes. So the point then of this information is to break through mental slavery. Now, why is this important? Here's the thing: what you believe, what you think, influences how you feel. How you feel influences what actions you take. What actions you take influences the results you get. And the results you get influences how you think and what your belief system is. So it's important to keep that as a positive feedback loop. So I believe that African history must contain more than ancient Egypt and more than slavery. So what is black history? This was a map drawn by the very great professor W.E.B. Du Bois. Now can you see that there's rather more on this map than ancient Egypt and the slave coast? Can you see there's a little bit more on the map than that? And these ancient civilizations are hardly ever spoken about, so I'm going to give them some shine. Now, learning a history makes you mentally stronger and changes your aspirations. After all, do you want to spend all your adult life living like this? Are you feeling that? Alright, so today's presentation. I'm going to speak on the African history of gold. And this is to provide the inspiration to build a team. The inspiration for why you should see value in the other people in this room. Because you are going to see the history and heritage of the other people in this room. And guess what? They look like you. Therefore, that history and heritage is yours too. And I have to big up the great ancestor George Sabiro. He wrote a book called Black Folks' Guide to Making Big Money in America. And on the back of the book he says, in your struggle out of poverty and powerlessness, never forget the golden rule. He who has the gold rules. And that was pretty much the inspiration for putting this class together. Alright, so, introduction. In 1790, the British Government Select Committee invited Carl Burns Wadstrom to visit them to testify before the British Select Committee. And the evidence was published as minutes of the evidence taken before the Select Committee on the slave trade, 1790. And the Select Committee wanted to interview Carl Burns Wadstrom because he knew about the slave trade. And what they did was they asked him to come to the stand, and then they said, have they any manufacturers amongst them? Meaning, have the people of Senegal who are being slave traded, do they have any manufacturers amongst them? And essentially, what was going on is the slave trade in this part of Africa. This is what Carl Burns Wadstrom was being asked to testify. He replied, I have been surprised to see with what industry they manufacture their cottons, their indigo, and other dyeing articles, as well as several sorts of manufacture in wood. They make soap, they tan leather, and work it exceedingly well, even with good taste. They work bar iron into several articles, as for instance, lances, instruments for tillage, poignards, etc. They work in gold very ingeniously, and so well that I have never seen better made articles of that kind in Europe. A great number of articles for ornaments of gold, silver, brass, leather, etc. Their cloth and their leather they manufacture with uncommon neatness, and I have samples with me to show in case it should be desired. In other words, the people of Senegal had a high culture, and Carl Burns Wadstrom had evidence to bring to the British Government Select Committee in 1790. And that raises one big question. What happened to this gold? You think that's a big question? Do you know what? I think I found where it is. And I believe it's in a South African museum. And guess what? Somebody went to that South African museum armed with a very dangerous object. Do you know what the dangerous object was? A camera. There's a dangerous object. Are you feeling that? You're Your respect for Africans have just shot up there, hasn't it? Do you see how I did that? One image and your respect has shot up. Also, the people that are next door, do you think they're missing something? Yes. Dear oh dear. As I said, you can drag a horse to water. You know it goes. We feeling this? Alright, so what else do we know about Senegal in 1790 from Carl Burns Wadstrom's testimony before the Select Committee? We know that the king's name was Dalmani, and he was a well-educated man holding the position of Grand Marabout. Marabout means chief holy man from an Islamic perspective. His subjects were very honest and hospitable and showed Wadstrom, and I'm quoting now, all civility and kindness. Moreover, the people of Senegal have an extraordinary genius for commerce. They had a materia medica of about 2,000 or nearly 3,000 plants. That's a lot, by the way. If you consider that the ancient Egyptians had a materia medica of 1,000 plants, these guys had a pharmacopoeia 2.5 times bigger than what the ancient Egyptians had. King Dalmani banned the trade in captured Africans. However, the Senegal Company, which was a French concern, bribed the Moors to raid Dalmani's subjects. The company supplied the Moors with the arms, gunpowder and ammunition to carry out these raids. The Select Committee then asked, do you mean to say that if the slave trade was abolished, they would extend their cultivation and manufactures? Meaning, if they stopped the slave trade, would Africa flourish? Wadstrom replied, yes. Particularly if some good European people had enterprising spirit enough to settle among them in another way than is the case at present. In other words, especially if Europeans stop the slave trading. The result of the raids, according to Wadstrom, was the chief hindrance to the improvement of the cultivation, insofar as the Negroes never ventured to go out into the fields unless very well armed. And as I like to say, things that make you go, In other words, by 1790, the British government was fully informed that their actions were mashing up Africa. They were fully informed of the high culture, high technology, high art, high jewelry. They were fully informed. So that's why they didn't stop it. Get it? All right, now, how does this information change attitudes towards oneself and kind? People in this room, your belief system is now different, isn't it? What you think about black people and what we're capable of is now different. Your feelings are different. Hopefully your actions will be different. And one of the ways that your actions could be different is to support what my man Tony Warner's doing, support what we're doing. Yesterday I was at an event, the launch of Spirit of the Pharaoh, and they're looking to do big things. They've even had the royal warrant to make gold in the shape of, the arcs and that kind of thing. Do you see? Big things, watch this place. So actions, and then that's going to lead to powerful results, which will then lead to powerful beliefs and powerful thinking. All right, so people are falling asleep already. It's stretch time, right? Everyone needs to get up. Okay, because we're going to get heavy on this thing, so right. If someone hasn't got up, feel free to tickle that person. Okay, so it's like this. Like this. Alright, so let's stretch this way. I'll see some people that sat down, feel free to tickle that person. Okay, stretch this way. It's to the back, like this. Good. It's to the front, like this. Alright, thanks a lot. Yeah. Alright then. So, were there other West African states known for their gold-based Commonwealth. Do you think so? Yes. Yeah. And one of those states is this empire right here. Can you see it? Can you see what that says? The Ashanti Empire. Now we have an account of the Ashanti Empire because an Englishman entered the capital city called Kumasi and he wrote an account of it called Mission from Cape Coast to Ashanti. The Englishman's name is Thomas Bowditch. So he's setting foot into the Ashanti capital, and this is what he wrote. We entered Kumasi at 2 o'clock. Upwards of 5,000 people, the greater part warriors, met us with awful bursts of martial music. The smoke which encircled us from the incessant discharges of musketry confined our glimpses to the foreground. So they've entered this place and they've come across awful music. Awful is the word awe, A-W-E. Does that make sense? Yeah. Music that's inspiring awe. And then, what have they seen? There's a whole bunch of soldiers on a drill. Guns are being fired off. Then we get the account of the people and how they're dressed. Let's read the account. The dress of their captains was a war cap. Their vest was of red cloth, covered with symbols in gold and silver. They wore loose cotton trousers with immense boots of a dull red leather coming halfway up the thigh. The king, his tributaries and captains were resplendent in the distance, surrounded by attendants of every description. At least 100 large umbrellas which could shelter 30 persons. Wait a minute, let's stop there. Did we know this? An umbrella that could shelter 30 people. Then we read on. Was sprung up and down by the bearers with brilliant effects, being made of scarlet, yellow, and the most showy cloths and silks, and crowned on the top with crescents, pelicans, barrels, and arms and swords of gold. The superior captains and attendants wore Ashanti cloths of extravagant price, from the costly foreign silks which had been unravelled to weave them in all varieties of colour as well as pattern. These cloths were of an incredible size and weight, and thrown over the shoulder exactly like a Roman toga. If you've ever seen Ashantis presenting, you know that they dress in the same way that the ancient Romans did, except that the cloth that they wear has got those kente patterns. Alright, so do you think we should look at some of the art? We've just been told about the most amount of gold. Do you think we should see something? Yes. So this is 18th and 19th century Ashanti, and this is in the same South African museum. No doubt the same person went there with that same dangerous object, the camera. By the way, this image appears in the first volume, first edition of When We Ruled. There's 108 pieces of gold in that necklace. We're feeding them. Not exactly jungle savagery, is it? Now that's what I call blinging, right? Alright, can anyone spot an African proverb being described? Yeah, so this one here, you've all spotted this, right? Right, this is a proverb, and it's called Sankofa. And it's a bird that's moving in one direction, but looking back. And it implies, go back and fetch it. Go back and fetch what? Go back and fetch your culture. Go back and fetch your history. Go back and fetch your tradition, and bring it with you as you're moving forward into the future. Can you see? This one's also a proverb, by the way. Can you see it's the top of a walking stick? And what it is, it's a dignitary holding an egg, and the egg symbolizes power. And if you don't hold the egg tightly enough, you drop the egg, and it falls to the ground, you lose your power. But if you hold on to the egg too tightly, you'll break the egg, and the yolk will just simply run down your arm and you lose your power. So power is about getting the balance between holding on to it tightly but not holding on to it too tightly. Are you feeling this? All right, now, I've shown you what the pieces look like. What does it look like on someone presenting in true Ashanti style? Do you think we need to see that?
Yeah.
Are you feeling that? So you can tell all the people outside how much they're missing. All right then, so what about the earliest empires? The earliest empires in West Africa were the empires of ancient Ghana, medieval Mali, and the Songhai Empire. Now, the investigator Andrew Mohammed said something about Mali, so I'm not going to duplicate what he says. I'm going to say what he didn't say. Do you see? But we're going to start with ancient Ghana. Ancient Ghana was this massive empire that on a modern map, this bit would be Senegal and Gambia, that bit would be Guinea, this bit would be Mauritania, and this bit would be Mali. The capital city was called Kumbi Saleh. All right, so what do we know about gold in ancient Ghana? Gold mining went back at least to the 4th century AD. 4th century means 300 and something AD. We know that gold, sometimes silver, was used to make swords, shields, bracelets, bells, and was turned into thread to embroider cloth. How do we know this? There's an account. Someone wrote a geography book in Spain called the Book of the Roads and Kingdoms. Book of the Roads, Book of the Kingdoms. In other words, a book of geography. And the scholar's name is El Bekri. And this was published in Spain in 1067, 1 year after the Battle of Hastings, 1066. And this is how the emperors of Ghana were going on in 1067. Let's read it. When he gives audience to his people, he sits in a pavilion around which stand his horses, caparisoned in cloth of gold. Behind him stand 10 pages holding shields and gold-mounted swords. And on his right hand are the sons of the princes of his empire, splendidly clad, with gold plaited into their hair. The governor of the city is seated on the ground in front of the king, and all around him are his ministers in the same position. The gate of the chamber is guarded by dogs of an excellent breed, who never leave the king's seat. They wear collars of gold and silver. Well, let's do an analysis. Remove the people. So I'm not interested in people. What were the animals wearing? Okay, what about the horses? Cloth with gold stitched through it, right? Okay, what about the dogs? What were they wearing? Gold and silver collars. How many of you all as humans can afford gold and silver collars? Right, so the dogs are blinging more than you are, yes? Okay, now, recently they excavated an ancient Ghanaian city called Jene, and they found some 9th century artifacts. Are you feeling that? You have to admit that is ill, isn't it? All right, they did some more excavations, and they found a burial, not of a king, but of a tributary king, a junior king. Do you see? And this is what was buried with that junior king. Are you feeling this? This artifact is thought to be 12th century, 1100 and something. All right, now which empire succeeded ancient Ghana? Do you know where this place is? What's the name of this empire? It's not Songhai, it's Mali. The same one mentioned by Andrew Mohammed. And this is what the BBC and CNN has to say about Mali. Check this out.
Natural disasters threaten civilizations with extinction. The Black Death kills more people in Europe, Asia, and North Africa than any catastrophe has before. Civilizations which avoid the plague thrive. In West Africa, the Empire of Mali becomes the richest in the world. Islam survives. The last great nomad conquerors burst out of Central Asia, reaching India and the Mediterranean. Trade flourishes in the Indian Ocean. Java enjoys unrivaled prosperity. In Europe, Christendom is pinched by famine, plagued by pestilence, crushed by cold. 1,000 years of history. Millennium.
Did you hear that? In West Africa, the Empire of Mali becomes the richest in the world. Yeah, do you think we need to meditate on that? So how did this show up? A Moroccan gentleman called Ibn Battuta visits Mali. And when he was there, the emperor, known as the Mansa, his personal name was Suleiman, Mansa Suleiman, was holding court. And this is the written description of the Mansa holding court. The Sultan holds sessions during the days associated with the two festivals after the late afternoon prayers on the platform. The men-at-arms come with wonderful weaponry, quivers of silver and gold, swords covered with gold, their sheaths are the same, spears of silver and gold and wands of crystal. 4 of the emirs stand behind him to drive off flies, with ornaments of silver in their hands which look like riding stirrups. The commanders, the judge and the preacher sit according to custom. The interpreter, Duga, bring in the Mansa's 4 wives and his concubines, who are about 100 in number. On them are fine clothes, and on their heads they have bands of silver and gold with silver and gold apples as pendants. Are you feeling this? Alright, so have any of these things survived in the museum sector? Well, there's a museum in America called the Detroit Institute of Arts, and they have a piece which no one really knows where it is, what date, whatever, but is connected to this culture. Are you feeling that? And then what happened was, me and some colleagues wrote a book on the West African Empire of Songhai, and on the front cover we used this image. Right, so that is 11th century style. That's how we were going on back in the day. Yeah. Alright. What about the Songhai Empire? Now the Songhai Empire proper, according to Leo Africanus, who got there in 1526, this is what we read. Corn, cattle, milk and butter. This region yields in abundance, but salt is very scarce. Salt is brought here by land from Tagaza, which is 500 miles away. When I myself was here, I saw 1 camel load of salt sold for 80 ducats. The king of Timbuktu is rich and has many plates and scepters of gold. Some weigh 1,300 pounds, and he keeps a magnificent and well-furnished court, says Leo Africanus. Did you hear what he just said? Plates and scepters of gold, 1,300 pounds. You know that's 14 stones. Are you feeling this? Yeah? Alright, so who wore gold? According to El Idrisi, their merchants dress in tunics and gowns with turbans around their heads and ornaments of gold. The nobles and notables who wear the head wrap, still worn today, have dealings with the merchants and sit in with them and advance them goods in return for a share in the profits. In other words, the tunics, the gowns, the turbans, and the bling, that's how we were going on. And then even some of the elite troops distinguished themselves from the others by wearing golden bracelets. And the deal was this though, to become a part of the elite troops, you are not allowed to turn your back even if you're losing. Does that make sense? So you get to bling, but you've got to keep facing the enemy, because that's the deal if you're an elite soldier. Askia the Great. There was a pilgrimage that Askia the Great made, and he was accompanied by an army of 1,000 infantry, a cavalry detachment of 500 horsemen, some 300,000 pieces of gold were allotted to financing the trip, 1/3 of the amount was used to cover the cost of travel. Another third was distributed as charity in the holy cities of Arabia and for the support of an inn in Mecca for the housing of Sudanese pilgrims. And the last third was expended in the purchase of merchandise, says John Jackson. So we need to know how much is 300,000 pieces of gold. Do you think we need to know that?
Yeah.
All right, there's a scholar called Professor Hunwick. He thinks that when he says today's prices, he was writing in the 90s. In the 90s, that would be the equivalent of £8 million. Are you feeling this? Yeah? All right, so how was gold used? There is a source. You know Timbuktu's got written chronicles? One of those chronicles is called the History of the Sudan, which means History of the Land of the Blacks. And by the Land of the Blacks, in this context, they're talking about West Africa. All of the utensils of Askia Dawood's household were of gold. Dishes, pinchers, pestle, and mortar, everything. Are you feeling that? Calligraphers use gold leaf to decorate manuscripts. Do you think we need to see that? Do you think we need to see that? That's how we were going on back in the day. Yeah? Okay, so what scale are we talking about? Songhai was eventually conquered by the Arabs of Morocco. And we're going to read the Arab account of what happens next. Do you see? So they conquer Songhai. We're going to read what they say happened next. Al-Mansur received so much gold dust, musk, slaves, ebony, and other valuable objects that the envious are troubled and all spectators are stupefied. He now pays his functionaries in pure metal of good weight, from which it would appear that he had not been above falsifying his coinage. There were 1,400 smiths in his palace employed in making the gold into coins, while other portions of the treasure were converted into necklaces and jewels, and the name of El-Dekebi, the Golden, was given to the Sultan. In other words, the Moroccans employed 1,400 goldsmiths to melt down Songhai gold. Let that sink in. Are you feeling that? Okay, so were there other African empires? Right, can you see this here? Monomotapa, Monomotapa. And that is the empire that is Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Mozambique. Yes? Can you see it's a little bit big? Think it's a little bit big? And guess what? Their burials used to take place on top of a hill called Mapungubwe Mountain. And this is what was found. Are you feeling that? It's about this big. It's a golden rhino. And the significance of that is this. One of our great scholars is called De Graaf Johnson. And he says, this fact is interesting in view of the modern assertion that the African never knew the art of mining, and that but for the presence of Europeans, the extracting of the mineral wealth of the great continent could not have been undertaken. Right, old heads here will remember that the reason white supremacists gave to justify apartheid in South Africa is white supremacy has to stay in power in South Africa because black people are not clever enough to pull out the resources. Yeah, do you remember that argument? Yeah. Do you know that not only is that not true, it's the exact opposite of the truth. That's right. In other words, Africans invented mining, and the group of Africans that invented mining were the South Africans. Did you know the oldest mine in the world is 43,200 years old, and it's in Swaziland? In other words, the gold evidence from Southern Africa mashes up the arguments that the white supremacists have. Now, let me give you some details. It was in 1904 that two archaeologists rediscovered black South African mining. And those archaeologists were R.N. Hall and W.G. Neal. And they found thousands of gold mines 150 feet deep. And they estimated that Africans dug up 43,250,000 tons of ore. And they estimate that that is 700 tons of pure gold. Now, an African-American scholar estimates that at $7.5 billion at 1998 prices, and I estimate that that's 20 billion pounds at contemporary prices. Are we feeling this? All right, now, not only were they digging to a depth of 150 feet, but here's the biggie. What was the outcrop that they were digging? We read, the bygone miners must have been industrious beyond belief, since they worked in rock so obdurate that the same sort of reef is nowadays blasted with dynamite, and yet they remove many million tons of ore. It is a practical testimony to their skill that the modern engineers follow to this day the lines of their ancient workings. So not only were they digging to a depth of 150 feet, not only did they shift 43.25 million tons of ore, they were doing it where the rock was so obdurate that you would need to blast up with dynamite to get in, let alone dig to 150 feet. Are we feeling this? Okay, so what about East Africa? Along the East African coast is the civilization of the Swahili. And the Swahili civilization takes us all the way down from Somalia to Mozambique. And the Swahili civilization was described when a Portuguese scholar got there in 1517. That scholar's name was Duarte Barbosa, and he says, the Moors of Sofala, this is Mozambique, clothe themselves from the waist down with cotton and silk cloths, and other cloths they wear over their shoulders like capes, and turbans on their heads. Some wear small caps dyed in grainy checkers and other woolen clothes in many tints, also camlets and other silks. Once the Portuguese got to Kilwa, Tanzania, this is what we read. They are finely clad in many rich garments of gold and silk and cotton, and the women as well, also with much gold and silver chains and bracelets, which they wear on their legs and arms, and many jeweled earrings in their ears. And then when the Portuguese went to Pemba, Mafia, and Zanzibar, the people dressed as they did in Kilwa. The most gold, the most silver, the most silk, the most cotton, the most bling. So the big question now is, how much of this has survived? I think that's a good question. Now, the answer is very little, but let me explain. The museums in Kenya, what they've done is they've looked at some of the modern artifacts which they believe correspond with the medieval ones. Do you see? And what they've done is they've put these reconstructed artifacts in the museum so you can see what would have been there in the 13th century, in the 14th century, in the 15th century. Do you see? All right. Are you feeling this?
Yeah.
Are you feeling these?
Yeah.
All right, now this is a treasure box. I'm going to turn it round because I took these photographs. Now the photographs have to be taken through glass, which is why they're a little bit misty, but I'm going to turn it round. Are you feeling that? Check out this one. Are you feeling that? And can you see that there's a Swahili name as well? The fact that there's a Swahili name as well tells you this is indigenous things. Now, have you ever looked through an African history book, or an African art book, or an African crafts book, and you've seen a silver handbag? This is how you know they're taking the mickey. Yeah. And guess what? It's stretch time. Everyone needs to get up. Alright, so stretch time says like this. Yeah, hold the big drum and go up, so it's like this. Stretch in this way. Good. You stretch in this way. Good. Just turn up. Just turn up front, like this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get ancient on you. Going back to the ancient world, one of the civilizations is the civilization of Aksum. Aksum is roughly where Ethiopia is today. It would also include Eritrea. Now, I know a lot of Eritreans don't want to know that because they're beefing with Ethiopians big time. And when I tell Eritreans that you and Ethiopians are the same group of people, they want to kill me, but that's the truth. Anyway. Alright, so that's how the Aksumites were going on back in the day. They had golden coinage, you all. They had silver coins. And they were one of only 4 countries in the world that could afford to issue gold coins. And these coins began to be issued about 270 AD, and they kept on issuing them. Do you see? Are you feeling this? What else did they do with the gold? They transformed gold and silver into plates. And at one time, they were even making statues 15 feet high, 3 times life size, of gold and bronze. Are you feeling that? No, they don't do that anymore, but back in the day they used to do that. But what else did they do? The British tried a thing. What about that for some scholarly terminology? Yeah, they tried a thing in Ethiopia in 1868 at a site called Magdala. And they thieved stuff. And one of the things they stole was this. Are you feeling that? They also stole this. Now, one would have thought, again, that these kinds of images would have made it into African history books. They haven't. So that people don't know that this is how we were going on back in the day. Yeah? Alright, where was Kush? Kush is where Sudan is today, approximately. Alright, and you've got important Kushite cities like Napata was one of its capitals, and Meroe was one of its capitals. And one of the queen mothers was very, very powerful, and her artifacts were found. Alright, so let's talk about Kush. Herodotus was an ancient Greek historian. He tried to enter Kush, but he couldn't. The Nile was too difficult to navigate, so he gave up. But Herodotus got hold of a Persian spy report. So this is what the Persian spies told Herodotus. He led them to a fountain wherein they had washed. They found their flesh all glossy and sleek, as if they had bathed in oil, and the scent came from the spring like that of violets. When they quitted the fountain, the king led them to a prison, where the prisoners were all of them bound with fetters of gold. Among these Ethiopians, Kushites, copper is of all metals the most scarce and valuable. After they had seen the prison, they were likewise shown what is called the Table of the Sun. Also, last of all, they were allowed to behold the coffins of the Ethiopians, which are made according to report of crystal. Are you feeling this? Yeah. This is what the Persian spies told Herodotus about what was going down in Sudan. Do you see? And everything said there has been proven. You know the fountain, you know what it was? It was a so-called Roman bath. I say so-called. If Herodotus is writing this in 450 BC, where were the Romans? They don't exist. So it's not a Roman bath, it's a Kushite bath that the Romans have copied. Do you see? Second thing, The Table of the Sun, it's a monument. That has been found, the archaeologists have identified it. The coffins made of crystal, not quite true. It was crystal plus gold. Yes, they've been found. Does that make sense? All right, so the only thing then is, were the prisoners really bound with fetters of gold? That's the one thing we can't prove. Does that make sense? But this is what we do know. Kush was the source of Kemetic gold. And the Kushites used gold to decorate the walls and statues of temples in Meroe and Musawarat. And in 1834, an Italian grave robber discovered the treasures of a queen mother of Kush. They discovered her pyramid, they destroyed her pyramid and stole the artifacts. And these stolen artifacts are in a German museum, but I have got some photographs. Do you think we need to see them?
Yeah. Wow. Look at that.
Now these are what's called seals. Let me explain the seal. It's a ring. Does that make sense? And the Queen Mother, if she wants to stamp off a document, she would presumably dip the ring into oil or some kind of ink and then press onto the papyrus, and she signed off the document. Do you see? All right, that's 3 of them. Let me show you some more. Go on, admit it. You ain't seen nothing like that. Are you feeling this? Now these particular ones are not from Queen Mother Amanishakhetu's burial. These are some other Sudanese burials. Are you feeling this? Are you enjoying this? Now we can include the Kemetans. See, when people deal with African history, they deal with it as if Kemet's the only place in Africa where there's any intelligent black people. The rest of Africa doesn't count, and they also give the impression that once we do that, then we talk about the slave trade and we're done. I'm showing you this is the stuff in between that we should be talking about. So now we're going to include the Kemetans. I'm going to use just 2 examples. So Kemet then is roughly the same place as modern Egypt, except the border's a bit higher. Does that make sense? And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Are you feeling this? Now, here's the thing. Even though this is a European reconstruction, they've even had to get the hair right, because you can't do that with Caucasian hair. Yes? So, in other words, even they had to step correctly on this one. Are you feeling this? Yeah? Are you feeling that?
Yes.
Terry Jervis, I said he's reconstructed some Egyptian artifacts. He's reconstructed one that looks like this. Do you see that circular thing? All right, so, summing up. We have glimpsed the amazing history of gold in Kemet, Kush, Aksum, Murmutapa, the Swahili coast, the Ashanti Empire, and Senegal. We've looked at the Kushite treasures of Queen Mother Amanishakhetu, and we have seen the Ashanti crown jewels. All right, so, would you like to know some more? This building here is where I work. It's called the Croydon Supplementary Education Project. And if you live within firing distance, we have a Saturday school, which your children are welcome to attend. We have a night school. We do book launches. Right? Let me go backwards. Yeah. All right. We even do salsa. We do adult education courses, including Black Studies and Stitch. Stitch is sewing techniques with an individual touch. And what Stitch is we're doing Yoruba-themed textiles.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it.
Yeah,
Yes.
one sentence, drop one sentence on Stitch, go on.
Oh my gosh. I don't know about a sentence, but it's amazing. I've only just started and they're saying I'm a natural, so.
Alright, and that's it from me, so I hope you enjoyed our session. And big up to everybody. There it is. Thanks a lot.
Do you want to do a quick question and answer? Yeah. Alright, cool. So, who's got questions?
Okay, Nubia. Some historians use Nubia and Kush as more or less related terms. So Nubia is really the southern part of Egypt and the northern half of Sudan. Same place where Kush is, and some people use the names interchangeably. Nubia is the part of Africa with the most history. The very first civilization in the world is Nubia. Then we get Egypt, then it's back to Nubia, then we get Egypt again, because we get different kingdoms, do you see? And then that civilization has, my estimation, about 8,000 years of history, where I can show you monuments, I can show you artifacts, I can show you inscriptions. It's a big, big history.
I already partly answered the question, but could you tell us, because I think you're writing when you say people start at Kemet, Egypt, and then go into slavery, but it's the pre-dynastic and pre-Comitian societies which are often very difficult to find information about.
It is why, because once we get pre-Kemet, we're in most cases pre-writing. Do you see? So there are ways you can write some of that history. Let me give you some obvious examples. There's something called the Blombos Cave, which is in South Africa, which has got the world's first piece of art. And that goes back something like 70,000 years. Then we have Swaziland, the world's first mine, 43,000 years. Then we have the Lebombo Bone, the world's first numerical system, thought to have been arranged by women, 37,000 years old. Then you've got the Ishango bone, also thought to have been written by women. We've got base 10 on it, base 12 on it, prime numbers, addition and subtraction. That's 25,000 years old. Right, then we have the New Kenya Hill District of Kenya, 15,000 years ago, the first example of the domestication of cattle, you see. Then we have 12,000 years ago, Wadi Kubanya in Nubia, the first example we have of agriculture. And then we go back to 9,000 years ago, the world's first mummy, which was in Libya at a site called Juan Mumujiaj. And then after that we then get Nabta Playa, astronomy, 8,400 years ago. And then after that now we get the Kingdom of Nubia, 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BC. And then now that's the swap from prehistory to history. Does that make sense? And then Kemet is 5660 BC, that's our second civilization. Sumer, 3,300 BC. Sumer is in Iraq. Even though it's in Iraq, that was a black civilization too, that's the third civilization. Do you see? And then gradually we get the unfolding of history.
I just wanted to ask in terms of date, that word Ethiopia, the area, where does that come in?
Ethiopia is a Greek name. Literally means the land of the sunburnt faces. And what it is a generic term that the Greeks used for Africa, a generic term that the Greeks used for black people. If the ancient Greeks saw you all, you'd all be Ethiopians, you see? Sometimes, though, the scholars use the term Ethiopia to refer to one country in Africa. And when they pick out the one country, they usually mean Sudan, not what we today call Ethiopia. Do you see? Now what it is this. People from Ethiopia, the modern country called Ethiopia, they respect African history. And they know how to present themselves and their history. And they're quite happy teaching Sudanese history to do it. And that's why so many people think that when the Greeks use the term Ethiopia, referring to one country, they mean Addis Ababa. They don't, they mean Sudan. But the people of Addis Ababa are quite happy to teach that history and heritage because it makes them look good, do you see? And that's what the cause of the confusion over where, when the Greeks said Ethiopia, where did they mean? That's why there's the confusion.
Yes, I'd like to commend you and filling in the gaps, the historical gaps, because, like you say, a lot of people, them leave out the middle, you understand? So, more commend you on that.
Respect, sir. Respect.
Yeah, you explained about the people of Ethiopia. Yeah. You were just explaining about the people from Ethiopia. Could you give me a clearer picture of where these people derive from?
Which one, sorry?
Modern day Ethiopians.
Modern day Ethiopians are, okay, there's a theory widely believed by modern Ethiopians that a lot of them are not from Ethiopia at all, and a lot of them say they're from Yemen. Yeah? And because a lot of them are lighter skinned than your regular black person, a lot of people believe that. It's rubbish. They're indigenous. What it is this. A lot of scholars ran around with the idea that there is somebody in Africa called a true Negro. And the true Negro, you had to have the blackest skin, the highest cheekbones, the flattest face, the broadest nose, the thickest lips. And if you're not that, you must be mixed with something. And then what then happened was, they then classified the non-Negroes as Bantus, Hottentots, Pygmies, Bushmen, Danakils, Fuzzy Wuzzies. Yes, the term Fuzzy Wuzzies appears in the documents. Semites, Hamites, and all this kind of nonsense. Now, unfortunately, a lot of light-skinned Ethiopians believe that rubbish. And because they believe that rubbish, they don't want to be classified as Negroes. And I've spoken to them, especially those that come to live in the West, and the moment they're getting off the plane, they're being called the N-word, and they're thinking, why am I being called that? I'm not that. And they've had to become schooled in the idea that they are Negroes just like the rest of us. You get it? Yeah? And so the idea that they came from Yemen is Eurocentric propaganda that a lot of Ethiopians are bought into. Do you see? But they are fully indigenous.
Any more questions?
This is a question. It's also something that, just to go back to, thank you again for the presentation. And it brings to mind that this being the, forgive me, the month of black culture.
BHM.
Black History Month, the month we've been given to look at our history. I wonder whether we think that your discussion could be taken into white schools, any
Why?
school.
Why? I need to get this to black people. And what's more, those empty chairs shouldn't be empty.
Any school, because all the schools are being told that October is about our history month.
to the point. A lot of people look at Black History Month as we've been allowed 1 month for our history. Not true. We struggled to get that month. And so we have to big up people like Achaba Adai-Sebo, we have to big up people like Ansel Wong, we have to big up even Linda Bellis. So we did that. And what's more, I've seen the program that when they put Black History Month together, who they invited. It was hardcore. Maulana Karenga, Francis Creswellsing, Ben Yochanan, Van Serti. You know what, them mans, they were not ramping. You know? So it's not like Black History Month now where we ramping. Back in them days, they were not ramping. Alright, to come to your point now. Should we take this into schools? Hell yeah, we should take this into schools. But the thing is, the schools want Black history, but they don't want to pay for it. And I think my man here, Tony Warner, we can agree on this one, yeah? They're taking the mickey. See, when they bring experts in to advise and so on, they will pay them £650 a day. They will try and get us in on the sly, on the cheap, there's no budget, and all them kind of foolishness. And the truth is we don't play that anymore. So the bottom line is if people say that what I do is too adult, why don't we bring someone who's more children-friendly in? My colleague Kandasi Chimbiri has written children's books. And her books are school-friendly. Engage her, they ain't going to do it. Me and my colleagues, we've written the book Black British History, aimed at schools in a Key Stage 3 styling. Engage that, they don't want to do it. So my thing is this, the only way we are going to get into schools is if you, as parents, insist that the schools do that.
That's right.
Yes, I like the approach because question like what the sister asks is like we have to get white people approval before we can accept the whole history. You understand? So it have to get taught in a school first. But we need to can accept it in an auditorium like this or the higher speed. Because that's the only way we can get rid of the programming. If we have to look for white people to accredit our team, it not going to work. We just can't remain that same.
True say. And the other thing too is what people need to respect is how radical what we're doing is. As I said, my man here is doing his tours, he's doing the thing. So there's a whole bunch of education here. We run the Croydon Supplementary Education Project. We are a BAME Centre of Excellence.
How long have you been there?
38 years.
38 years.
Yeah.
Did you all know that?
And me and my teachers are writing new resource materials, which we are in the process of publishing all the time. We have books being launched at our centre all the time. You see, so people like Hakeem Addy, his book on African and Caribbean history. In Britain, that was launched at our centre. You see, yeah.
I wanted to ask, what are the ages of the people that go through the centre?
Okay, we deal with year 1. Year 1 is 5-year-olds, up to year 11, which is 16-year-olds. So we have the whole primary, secondary thing. We teach maths and English, we teach Black history, we teach triple science. That's what we teach on a Saturday in the night school, and the others we're adding Mandarin, we're adding Yoruba, where we in other words, we go in there. We also partner with other organisations. There's an organisation called Ultrapreneurs, where they're teaching young people entrepreneurship. Yeah, we put people through that program. You understand? We've partnered with Andrew Mohammed has partnered with us. We did a whole lecture series with him. We've had the scientist Leon Marshall has done his holistic health program. Does that make sense? Yeah. In the case of Mr. Waller, we're working on you, Brian. We're working on it, yeah. Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
going to say I've done both Robin's courses, the Black Studies 1 and 2, and I've also done the Black Holistic Health at CCP. I think that is a gold nugget that we can't let pass, and it's good for us to go there and also with our children, because you'll just see progress. You'll not believe what you see until you consult with you. Absolutely fantastic.
And I've been there with my 8-month grandbaby too.
And even some more, if you like, mainstream people like Michael Ohajuru, we try to engage him right now. We working on that. So. All right.
Any more questions?
Many, many years ago, I went to Zimbabwe, and then there was a place called Victoria Ruins. I was trying to remember the African name. But this Victoria Ruins, which you could just see a castle and various things that were there. Would that have had a link? Because it's in the southern part. As you were speaking, I was trying to think.
Monomotapa. The Europeans say monomotapa. The Shona say monomotapa. Yeah? So you might have come across places like Great Zimbabwe. There's another one called Kami. There's another one called Nanatali. And there's 600 others. And they're not just in Zimbabwe. They're also in Johannesburg, South Africa. They're also in Maniquene, which is on the coast of Mozambique. And there's also in Zambia. And there's allegations that there's even some as far west as Angola. And that would then tell you the spread of this empire, do you see?
Last chance. Okay, can we give a big round of applause?